Gentleman from the 25th District, Representative Dammeier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know when I was out on the campaign trail, and I suspect all the members of this body, we knew when we came down here, if we were successful, that we were going to face some very difficult decisions, decisions that would test our values and our priorities. And I think this is the first opportunity we have to kind of feel that pressure. But before I go into my remarks, Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the good work of the gentleman from the 48th in bringing this bill before us now. I appreciate the fact that we are acting today early in the session when we can have these cuts and these reductions have more effect. So I think it's good that we're having this debate early in our session. So with that said, Mr. Speaker, in my mind, the core of the difference between the striker proposed by the gentleman from the 28th and the base bill beneath it comes down to two fundamental issues. Are we going to continue to fund a well-intended yet failing social services program to the tune of $43 million by taking back money that's already been spent by our local schools to hire teachers to affect our youngest learners? At its core, that is what we're talking about. And Mr. Speaker, if you will, I'd like to remind us that we have a history on both of these topics, and I'll try to be brief. We've debated general assistance unemployable or the disability lifeline unemployable many times on this House floor. And I'm sure that the members remember the 2009 WISIP study that talked about how the fact that it's had ballooning caseloads, the fact that it is not a program focused on families, it's not a program that affects children, it's a program that affects largely male, largely white populations, that it's a program where the WISIP study called into question the very model that it was operating on by challenging the whole general assistance thing, saying there was no evidence-based studies to say that a general assistance model had a positive effect on the folks that we're trying to reach there. And I know that we remember last session when we did our best as a body to reform and rebrand it as Disability Lifeline and reform it, that some of those reforms have been frustrated by the courts, that our 24-month cap hasn't been able to stick in the medical arena. But as the good gentleman from the 20th pointed out, some of the reforms have been very positive. We have been successful in transitioning people from GAU or DLU to DLX, to the expedited Social Security, where they can know that they've got long-term support for their conditions. So there have been some positive aspects to it. But let's not forget that this program we're one of the only states in the West that the caseloads continue to grow, and that it is a challenge. This is a program that has been recommended for elimination by the governor, by our current governor, not once but twice, and has been recommended for elimination by previous governors. I think that begs our examination. And in this case, a prospective look at that is about $43 million. Now I'm going to transition back to education, as the good gentleman from the 47th talked about, and I know he knows this subject better than I. 2 years ago, with the passage of House Bill 2261, we set out on a new course. We acknowledged that the way the state of Washington funds education is not adequate to the task. Neither the mechanism by which we deliver the dollars nor the amount of dollars, that we have to step up to our responsibilities. And the first bill that we passed, the following session, we passed our first implementation bill, living up on that, and that was House Bill 2776. And House Bill 2776 targeted and prioritized the areas that we need to focus on first as we progress down our path of living up to our constitutional responsibility of funding K-12 education. I distinctly remember talking to our members, some of the members on the House floor, when we passed 2261, and I remember having the conversation that this vote is easy. There will be subsequent votes when we have to live up to the intent and execution and implementation of that bill that will be much more difficult. Mr. Speaker, today is one of those days. I'd also remind the body that in addition to those two pieces of legislation that I talked about, that we also have had oversight by the courts. That last February, Judge Ehrlich ruled in a trial court that we are clearly not living up to our constitutional responsibility to fund K-12 education. And that case right now is before the Supreme Court. And the actions that we take today are being watched by not only the Supreme Court, in addition to our communities and kids. But that brings me back to where we are today, Mr. Speaker. The difference between the Stryker proposed and the base bill fundamentally comes down to education. As the good gentleman from the 20th pointed out, the base bill cut $67 million from K-12 education. Let's remember back in December, as he points out, when we passed 3225, that it took a disproportionate share of the cuts, including when we supplanted the $208 million sent by the federal government specifically to support our K-12 schools. So let's not think that this is a fair share thing. The K-12 schools has given and given and given. And at that time we made, and I supported, some prospective cuts to programs that I think are very important as we try to wrestle with this deep budget problem that we're facing. So today, we've got the base bill cutting another $67 million from K-12 education, or the Stryker, which cuts $21 million. That $46 million is really the core of this debate, and as I said, it comes down to the difference between Disability Lifeline for the unemployable and the K-4 enhancement being applied retroactively. The prospect of going back to our local schools and saying that the promises that we made, that money was forthcoming, that you should be making your hiring decisions based on, that we're going to take that back, to me, Mr. Speaker, is unconscionable. That the hiring decisions, those teachers in those kindergarten through fourth grade classrooms were signed their contracts in May of last year, and they have been in the classrooms teaching our youngest students since September. Yet we in this body think it's the right thing to take that money back, to put that, where do we think the local school districts are going to make up that money? What's going to happen to those teachers? Mr. Speaker, as we stand here wrestling with this, I am called back to the days of 2261. If not now, at what point are we going to stand up to our constitutional responsibility? The issue today is very clear, and that's why it gets to the absolute core of the values and priorities that we bring as legislators to this body. So, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that for me, when it comes to weighing those two issues, the Disability Lifeline or funding or living up to our promise to fund teachers in classrooms affecting our youngest students, it's not a decision I make lightly, Mr. Speaker, but I can tell you today that I'm voting on behalf of the students, and I'm urging a yes vote. Thank you.